November 20th, 1943, 5:42 a.m. off the coast of Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll. The sky is still bruised purple when the first naval shells begin to fall. Battleships USS Colorado and USS Maryland thunder from the horizon, their 16-inch guns flashing like silent lightning. The concussion rolls across the lagoon and slams into the thin strip of coral sand ahead. Betio is barely 2 miles long, a sliver of land, and yet in the half-light it looks like a fortress. In the pitching bow of a small landing craft, a young Marine grips the wooden sides so tightly his knuckles pale beneath the Pacific spray. He tastes cordite and salt. The engines rumble behind him. Ahead, smoke, palm trees splintering, and somewhere beyond that haze, Japanese machine guns already waiting. The boat lurches forward. It is flat-bottomed, ugly, functional. The ramp at the front rattles with every swell. Stenciled on its side are 4 simple letters, LCVP. Landing Craft, Vehicle Personnel. Most of the Navy's old guard once dismissed it as a swamp boat. In Washington years earlier, they had laughed at the idea that a shallow-draft wooden craft designed by a Louisiana boat builder could change naval warfare. Real invasions, they believed, belonged to steel hulls and proper ships, not something that looked like it belonged in the bayous. But here, in the dawn at Tarawa, that little boat is carrying the first wave of the 2nd Marine Division straight into history. The lagoon water shifts color as the craft approaches the reef, pale turquoise turning milky white. Coral teeth lie just beneath the surface, jagged and merciless. Traditional landing boats would grind to a halt here, their deeper drafts ripping open like tin cans. The Higgins boat keeps moving. Behind the wheel stands a Navy coxswain, barely 20 years old, eyes locked forward. The craft's draft is just over 3 feet. It skims the water instead of biting into it. The bow rides high. The reef passes beneath. Ahead, Japanese artillery begins to answer the battleships. Shells crash into the lagoon. Water erupts in towering white plumes. The Marines crouch lower. You can almost feel the tremor in their breathing, that suspended moment between bombardment and contact, when hope still flickers that the shelling has done its job. It hasn't. As the naval guns lift, the island wakes up. Machine guns chatter from hidden bunkers made of coconut logs and reinforced concrete. Betio is honeycombed with fortifications. Admiral Keiji Shibasaki's 4,500 defenders have spent months preparing. Interlocking fields of fire, trenches, pillboxes, artillery zeroed in on every approach. The first wave is still 500 yards out. Water around the boats turns violent with impacts. Some LCVPs shudder as rounds punch through wood and steel. One explodes in a sudden flash of orange. Another veers off, engine coughing. But the Higgins boats keep coming. They are not armored warships. They were never meant to be. They are delivery systems, blunt, efficient, relentless. Each one carries 36 Marines or a jeep or a pack howitzer. Their design is brutally simple: a shallow hull, a protective cowl over the engine, and most revolutionary of all, a front-loading ramp that drops straight into combat. No climbing over rails, no jumping blind into surf. When that ramp falls, the battlefield is right there. Years before this morning, Andrew Higgins had argued fiercely with Navy procurement officers. He insisted the ramp was essential. He had watched men struggle in earlier exercises, trying to disembark from side-loading boats under simulated fire. It was too slow, too exposed. They told him it wasn't necessary. He built it anyway. Now, as one LCVP grinds forward through smoke and shellfire, its coxswain pushes the throttle to its limit. The reef shallows again. The engine whines. And suddenly, a jolt. The boat scrapes coral but doesn't stop. It slides over, barely clearing. Behind them, larger craft are already stuck, immobilized on the reef line. Marines spill over the sides into chest-deep water, rifles raised overhead, struggling forward under machine gun fire. But this Higgins boat pushes closer. 100 yards. 50. The coxswain yells something lost in the roar. The ramp drops. It slams into wet sand with a metallic crash. The Marines surge forward and are immediately cut down. The first man through the opening jerks backward as bullets tear through him. The second stumbles over his body. The surf turns red. There is no cover, only open beach and the relentless crack of Japanese Type 92 machine guns. Within minutes, the shoreline is chaos. And yet more boats are coming. Wave after wave of Higgins' craft punch through the reef line, delivering men directly onto a killing field that would have been unreachable without them. Some are shredded, others burn, but enough get through. Enough, because without these shallow draft boats, the Marines would be stranded hundreds of yards out, drowning under fire before ever reaching sand. By mid-morning, the beachhead is a nightmare, tangled wire, shattered palm trunks, wounded men calling for corpsmen. Radios crackle. Officers try to reassemble units decimated in seconds. The carefully timed assault is dissolving into survival. And still, more LCVPs approach through smoke. Back in Washington, the men who once questioned Andrew Higgins' design could not yet see what was unfolding on that tiny strip of coral. But on Betio, amid blood and splintered wood, a truth is becoming impossible to ignore. The invasion lives or dies by these boats. And the island is far from taken. The tide is falling. By late morning on November 20th, the lagoon around Betio turns treacherous. What had been shallow becomes skeletal, coral heads rising like broken teeth just beneath the surface. Landing craft that misjudge the depth grind to a halt. Engines scream. Propellers churn uselessly. Some Marines are forced to disembark 600 yards from shore. You can picture it, young men of the 2nd Marine Division stepping into water that climbs from waist to chest to neck, rifles held high, packs dragging them down. Machine gun rounds stitch the surface around them. Every step forward is a fight against gravity and fear. And yet, even in this chaos, the Higgins boats continue to press in closer than anything else in the lagoon. Their flat hulls skim across what stops heavier craft cold. To understand how that moment became possible, you have to leave the smoke of Tarawa and travel back several years, to New Orleans. Andrew Jackson Higgins did not look like the architect of a revolution. He was not a naval officer, not a graduate of Annapolis. He was a stubborn, sharp-tongued boat builder who knew swamps better than admirals. In the 1930s, his company built shallow draft workboats for trappers and oil crews navigating Louisiana marshland. Boats that could run aground and back themselves off. Boats that could survive mud, reeds, and unpredictable tides. When the U.S. Navy began exploring amphibious warfare concepts before World War II, Higgins saw an opportunity. The Marine Corps had been experimenting with landing operations since the 1920s, but their boats were slow, side-loading craft that forced troops to climb over rails into the surf. It was awkward, dangerous, inefficient. Higgins watched one of these exercises and shook his head. He knew his swamp boats could do better. He approached the Navy with a prototype, a shallow draft hull capable of sliding over obstacles instead of digging into them. The response was lukewarm. Some officers saw potential. Others saw a civilian outsider overstepping his place. Then Higgins added something radical. A ramp at the bow. The idea wasn't entirely new. He'd seen photographs of Japanese Daihatsu landing craft used in China with bow ramps. Higgins refined the concept, reinforced it, made it practical for mass production. Troops could now charge straight ahead instead of climbing over vulnerable sides. Traditionalists scoffed. Real ships didn't look like this. Real war wasn't fought from wooden craft that resembled fishing boats. Higgins didn't care. He invited Marines to test it themselves. He demonstrated how the ramp dropped cleanly, how vehicles could roll directly onto a beach, how men could exit in seconds instead of scrambling in confusion. He argued relentlessly that modern war would require mass amphibious assaults, not small raids, but entire divisions landing under fire. It sounded ambitious, almost absurd. Before 1941, America had never launched a full-scale opposed amphibious invasion across an ocean. Then Pearl Harbor happened. Suddenly, the United States faced an enemy entrenched across thousands of Pacific islands. Every advance would require crossing water and storming fortified shores. There would be no way around it. The Navy needed a boat that could deliver men directly onto hostile beaches, beaches protected by reefs, sandbars, and artillery. They turned back to Higgins. Production exploded. Factories in New Orleans roared day and night. Workers, many of them women and African Americans hired in integrated production lines uncommon for the era, assembled hulls at staggering speed. Higgins Industries became a symbol of wartime urgency. By 1943, tens of thousands of LCVPs were being shipped across the globe. And now, at Tarawa, their design was being tested in the worst possible conditions. Back on Betio's shoreline, Captain David Shoup, soon to be awarded the Medal of Honor, wades ashore amid the wreckage of the first waves. Communications are shattered. Units are scattered. Casualties are catastrophic. Yet reinforcements keep arriving. Higgins' boats dart through smoke like insects, some riddled with holes, others carrying fresh Marines into the storm. Their shallow draft allows them to push closer than expected despite the reef. When they can't go further, they still reduce the distance men must wade under fire. Every yard matters. Without them, the landing would collapse entirely. By midday, the lagoon is littered with destroyed craft, Amtraks disabled, larger landing ships stuck helplessly beyond the reef line. But the LCVPs, lighter and more maneuverable, continue shuttling men, ammunition, even stretchers filled with wounded back to hospital ships offshore. One coxswain makes trip after trip through artillery bursts. Another is killed at the helm, his hands still on the wheel as the craft drifts toward shore. The Higgins boat was never meant to be glamorous. It was meant to function. And here, under the worst fire the Marines had yet faced in the Pacific, it is functioning exactly as designed. As night falls on November 20th, only a fragile sliver of beachhead remains in American hands. Japanese counterattacks probe the lines. The air smells of cordite and blood and burning palm trunks. The Marines dig in behind corpses and broken equipment. Offshore, more Higgins boats idle in darkness, waiting for orders. Tomorrow, they will have to do it all again. And the island still belongs to the Japanese. November 21st, 1943, 6:10 a.m. Betio Island. Dawn comes hard and bright. There is no gentle light here, only heat already rising off the sand, revealing what the night concealed. Bodies lie where they fell, rifles half buried in coral grit. Landing craft hulls drift in the lagoon, blackened and smoking. The Marines who survived the first day have carved out a narrow foothold along Red Beach 2 and Red Beach 3. It is barely 150 yards deep in places. Japanese positions still dominate the airfield that runs like a spine down the island's center. Captain David Shoup stands amid the wreckage, exhausted, his uniform stiff with salt and sweat. Communications are still fractured. Units are mixed together, fragments of the 2nd, 8th, and 6th Marines fighting as improvised groups. And yet somehow, the line has held. Now it has to move forward. Offshore, Higgins' boats surge again. The tide is marginally higher this morning, just enough to give the coxswains hope. Engines rev, ramps rattle. Fresh waves of Marines climb aboard, faces set in that quiet, brittle calm before violence. You can almost hear the internal calculations: distance to shore, speed of approach, the seconds between ramp drop and exposure. The boats angle in. Japanese artillery has adjusted overnight. Shells walk across the lagoon with terrifying precision. One LCVP erupts in splinters, its passengers thrown into the water. Another loses power but continues drifting forward, carried by momentum and will. Still they come. The Higgins boat's genius is not armor, it is repetition. Simplicity, replaceable parts, sheer numbers. If one is destroyed, another fills its wake. By mid-morning, reinforcements reach the beach in sufficient strength to begin pushing inland. Flamethrower teams crawl toward concrete pillboxes. Bangalore torpedoes snake under barbed wire. Tanks, those that manage to cross the reef, grind forward in support, their tracks chewing through sand and shattered coconut logs. The fight is intimate now. Japanese defenders fire from slit openings barely visible beneath camouflage. Every bunker must be reduced one by one. Grenades tossed through firing ports. Charges placed against reinforced walls. The island shrinks into a maze of lethal compartments. Above it all, naval gunfire continues in measured thunder, creeping closer to friendly lines as Marines signal targets with colored panels and desperate radio calls. Behind the front, the Higgins boats never stop moving. They bring ammunition when belts run dry. They evacuate wounded men whose eyes stare unfocused at the sky. They ferry water, stretchers, more Marines. The lagoon becomes a highway of necessity. Without that constant shuttle, the foothold would wither. By the second night, Betio smells of decay and cordite. Japanese forces launch bands of charges into Marine lines, desperate, ferocious assaults that end in close-quarters chaos. Flares streak upward, turning darkness into a flickering nightmare of shadows and muzzle flashes. Somewhere along the line, a Marine hears engines offshore again. Even in darkness, the Higgins boats are operating. On November 22nd, the advance accelerates. The airfield is seized after brutal fighting. What remains of Admiral Shibasaki's garrison is compressed into the eastern tip of the island. There will be no surrender. The Japanese defenders fight nearly to the last man. The Marines push forward yard by yard, bunker by bunker. 76 hours after the first ramp dropped, organized resistance collapses. The island is secured, but victory feels heavy. Over 1,000 Marines are dead, more than 2,000 wounded. Of the roughly 4,500 Japanese defenders, only a handful survive. Tarawa is not just another island taken. It is a shock to the American public when photographs and film footage reach home. The scale of casualties in such a short battle forces hard questions. Was the cost too high? Was the reef misjudged? Could it have been done differently? Quietly within after-action reports, one conclusion stands out. Without the shallow draft landing craft designed by Andrew Higgins, the landing would have been catastrophic beyond recovery. Even with them, the reef nearly strangled the assault. Without them, Marines would have faced an impossible swim under fire with no steady flow of reinforcement. The boats that some once dismissed as swamp contraptions had carried an invasion across a barrier nature itself had designed to stop ships. And military planners are paying attention. Because Tarawa is not the last island. It is a rehearsal. And the next beaches will be bigger. Washington, D.C., December 1943. The photographs arrive first. Black and white images spread across briefing tables, Marines wading through chest-deep water, bodies floating in the surf, shattered landing craft hung up on coral. Admirals and generals study them in silence. Tarawa has been won, but it has exposed every weakness in America's amphibious doctrine. And yet, hidden inside the carnage is proof of something extraordinary. The Higgins boat worked. It did not eliminate casualties. It did not make war clean, but it made the assault possible. It delivered men closer to the objective than any conventional craft could have managed. It sustained the beachhead when everything else faltered. Lessons are written in blood. Reef reconnaissance must improve. Naval bombardment must last longer. Amphibious tractors, the tracked LVTs, must be used in greater numbers for the first waves. Communication between ships and shore must be hardened against chaos. And the production of LCVPs must increase. By 1944, Andrew Higgins, factories are operating at a pace few thought imaginable. Assembly lines stretch across cavernous warehouses. Sparks shower from welders' torches. Workers move with industrial rhythm, riveting hull plates, installing engines, fitting ramps. More than 20,000 LCVPs will be built by war's end. President Franklin D. Roosevelt reportedly tells Higgins, "Andrew, you are the man who won the war for us." It sounds like political flattery. It isn't entirely. Because Tarawa is not the climax, it is the proving ground. June 6, 1944, 6:30 a.m. Normandy. The English Channel is gray and heaving. German machine guns wait in concrete bunkers overlooking Omaha Beach. American soldiers of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions crouch inside familiar wooden hulls as ramps rattle under spray. The shape of the boat is unmistakable. Flat bow, drop ramp, shallow draft. Higgins boats. More than 1,000 of them participate in the D-Day landings alone. They deliver soldiers onto 5 beaches across 50 miles of coastline, under artillery fire, through obstacles, into history. You can trace a straight line from the coral reef at Tarawa to the shingle of Normandy. And beyond. Southern France, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Every time Allied forces must cross water to seize fortified ground, the same ungainly craft noses toward shore. It is not elegant, it is not heavily armored, but it is dependable, adaptable, and mass-producible. That is its genius. Back in New Orleans, Andrew Higgins remains blunt, impatient, sometimes abrasive. He fights bureaucracy as fiercely as any Marine fights on a beach, but his vision has been validated in the harshest arena imaginable. The men who once dismissed his ideas now depend on them. The swamp boat became the spearhead of modern amphibious warfare. And Tarawa, terrible, costly Tarawa, ensured that no planner would ever again underestimate the challenge of landing against a defended shore. It forced innovation. It demanded honesty. It reshaped doctrine. If you stand today on Betio's beaches, the water looks calm. The reef is visible beneath clear turquoise waves. It is almost peaceful. But close your eyes, and you can still imagine the sound: engines straining, ramps crashing down, boots splashing into surf under a storm of fire. They laughed at the Higgins boat once. They saw wood where they expected steel, simplicity where they demanded tradition. Then came Tarawa. 76 hours that turned skepticism into certainty. Because in the end, victory does not always belong to the most imposing design. Sometimes it belongs to the craft that can cross the reef. And